let's be honest, a right-wing politics right now, which is actually much more aggressive, much more intelligent, has a plan for retaining power, is synchronized in a global governance structure. They're not all the same, but they're governing in ways that complement each other. They're thinking through different problems together. The populist right is infinitely more, and this is a thing that, liberals, it's funny, they need to get used to. The populist right is a hell of a lot smarter and more strategic and more understanding of power right now. So when you think about who's occupying the White House, I say this, to people in my zone. Think not only just of the kind of traditional arguments about the range of things coming at you and who is most vulnerable, which is important and what, Sam, you're emphasizing, but also literally like, are you fighting against something that is just a caretaker? It's going to do a lot of damage and it's going to be disgusting. I'm not going to, sugarcoat that at all. But it's not – the Biden project is not new. It's the last breath of something that started in the 80s. And the right-wing populist project is beginning and could be locked in for decades.
Yes. And I would say that I think I would even go further and say that type of caretaker thing, like I can imagine if we were to have insight as to what was going on in that Politburos, there's a lot of jockeying. And in those situations, that is where there is opportunity. That is where, something has to happen. And certainly on some level, what we see with the Trump administration is the complete lack of leadership at the top. It just means that like, hey, I got an invite to a dinner with the president. Great. And I go in there, I say 5 words, and all of a sudden the whole policy for the country changes. And that's sort of, I'm not saying it's the exact same, there's an analogy, not quite in that sort of, so there is opportunity. I want to bring in Nomi in a second. We're going to blow out format today. It's just not happening. And we'll figure out a way of doing this other stuff in a bit. But first, let me just read this from Skillshare, because the Majority Report today is made possible in part by Skillshare. And for the first 500 people who go to skl.sh/Majority Report 7, you're going to get a free premium membership to Skillshare for 2 entire months. Skillshare is an online learning community that offers thousands of classes on most any topic you can imagine, all classes taught by experts in their field. They have classes on drawing. They have classes on painting. They have classes on video editing and photography, and video and photography editing, web design and web editing, running a small business, and a whole lot more. If they were smart, they would get one up for how to apply for one of those PPA loans. But apparently, I'll get stories on that too. But all these classes, they're less than an hour long. Every class is split up into bite-sized lessons. So it's easy to fit Skillshare into your week, even if you have a busy schedule. For me, my plan, tomorrow I will be off. But I'm going to be looking at haircuts at home with Mila to see if maybe I can trust her to cut my hair. She was going to do the bread making for sourdough for beginners, but it's Passover starting tonight. So no bread for a week. I'm going to check out the speed reading I've taken in the past, like how to make my iPhone take better pictures, et cetera, et cetera. So everyone can benefit from setting aside a little time to get creative. You may have some extra time these days. Skillshare has classes for every skill level. So whether you want to get better at something you already have a lot of experience with, or you want to explore something that's totally new to you, membership to Skillshare is less than $10 a month, gives you access to their entire library of classes. But the first 500 people go to skl.sh/Majority Report 7 are going to get a free membership for 2 whole months. I put the link underneath this video. If you're watching on YouTube, it's in the podcast description. Check it out. Can we bring Nomi in? Do you have her, Matt? Okay. There she is. Ladies and gentlemen, the host of the Nomaki Show.
For old time's sake, let's do a little pronunciation struggling.
And Nomaki?
Yeah.
Well, I did do it. It is. Because I do like a muh, and I can't do it like unless I go Nomiki Const.
No me key.
Money key. Get the money.
No meat key. Const. Patreon.com. The No Key Show, and YouTube.com. No Key Constant.
Do you speak another language?
Style note for yourself.
I'm from Massachusetts.
Next, Sam. Jesus
You
Christ.
speak Massachusetts is what you speak.
Yeah, exactly. Naomi, I imagine you. I know that you've heard the news. I imagine that you watched the speech. What are your thoughts?
So many thoughts. I was just thinking about 2016 when Bernie said that he was essentially going to suspend his campaign and release the delegates. He did it at the convention to Hillary Clinton, and I was standing. It was kind of this crazy moment with surrogates around Bernie, packed room, and I was standing on a chair, live streaming it and taking pictures, and just tears were coming down my face as everybody else was in a very similar situation. And Dave Weigel happened to actually write about that later. So if you ever want to go back and look at that story, but I'm not in that situation right now. I'm actually not even emotional, which is strange. I'm a little bit frustrated, but I'm also thinking, I think we were prepared for this. I think people who may have thought that he had a path forward, frankly, I think you could have been fooling yourself a little bit. I'm somebody who is an optimist and a true believer, but I also, understand that he wasn't getting the press that he needed to get in this moment of COVID. And he wasn't, even though he had the right message and the right platform and the right organizing for this moment, the press is just not giving him a break. I mean, before COVID, and the electoral path moving forward is confusing. We don't know which primaries are going to happen. We don't know if there's going to be a convention, and it's heavily weighted to Biden now that everybody's sort of fallen in line for him. And even though half the states haven't voted, it was already an uphill battle. And I think this crisis has just made it even more impossible. And I guess my frustration in this is that. I wish Bernie had really channeled FDR a little bit more. I wish he played politics a little bit more. I wish that this wasn't about the platform committee, because I was on the platform committee in 2016 and we fought. It was exhausting. We got, political threats. It was nasty. And also really moving to see organizations show up and activists show up. But 2 days later, they ripped up that piece of paper. It's not like all these Democratic candidates are using that platform. It's not like Kamala Harris runs on the Democratic platform that we ran on. It's not like Hillary Clinton did. So I think that Bernie, really could still use the leverage he has, but that would require a tremendous amount of political analysis and understanding how power works. And I don't know if that's something that Bernie inherently gets.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a sense of what conversations happened between Biden and Bernie that led to this, or where it's going in the future, and certainly, I think the agenda is going to be focused on trying to build outside power, and I don't know how much of ultimately in the short term how that translates. I mean, I agree with you. I think. The only analogy I can make in terms of when you talk about FDR more, I mean, that's really just a messaging politics type of thing. And in some respects, the analogy that I make was, I came up in the sort of the alt comedy world and there was a lot of what drove my generation of comedians
More cross, less Marin.
Right. Well, as critiquing the sort of comedy and entertainment at the time was, that's what drove a lot of that generation of comedians, and it opened up a lot of things. But you could do a show where you want to completely revamp, and maybe you've seen this sometimes in news too, where you have a format and really what needs to be changed is the content, not the format. But instead, it's instead of us sitting at a desk and interviewing people, I'm going to be floating in an orb, and I'm going to be, we're going to use 3D
Very
holograms.
Marianne of you. Very Marianne of you.
What I think is the problem?
3D holograms. Let me just finish this analogy. And instead, what it really should be is, no, just have a different, more interesting set of guests and interview them and interview them sitting down. And you don't need an orb. You don't need 3D. Just having it more interesting in a different set of guests. And on some level, Sanders, how he presented the issue sets, I think made it a little bit harder. And I don't know if it would have made a difference, but it made it, I think, a little bit harder for some people to sort of like adopt. And it made it a little bit easier to make what he was saying more radical sounding than it actually was.
I think there's a dual problem that they had communication wise, and they also contradicted themselves in it, because on one hand, there's this insistence on using language that certainly by the time he was actually a front runner, you did really need to drop. Because the truth is, he's basically saying, like, look, I'm about to lead the Democratic Party. Obviously, I have major differences with these people. I've ran a different campaign. I have a different value set. But I am going to consolidate now because I'm not the outsider anymore. I just won Nevada by a landslide, and I'm about to try to get this nomination. So you can't keep talking the same rhetoric. You need to pivot hard. And I think the FDR stuff is also there. And I think there's a million different messaging areas that could have been improved to frankly, from the beginning, sit down and say in 2018, okay, our campaign is fundamentally about dealing with the structural issues of this society, and what just drove the midterms was non-ideological resistance people. How do we synthesize those messages? And then on the flip side, and this is where what always would, what did frustrate me was like, okay, you can't let go of this revolution talk, but then on the other hand, this is like the teddy bear campaign that can't draw distinctions and can't go on attack in just a normal campaign sense. And obviously I mean that in the beginning with drawing distinctions with Warren. And I mean that from much earlier on, and it never happened with Biden, because I always thought this is a Sanders-Biden race.
Totally.
I never bought any other dynamic. Those are the choices. That's where we're going. And so I think that they really, that if you cut down the revolution rhetoric and increase just the traditional like oppo research and campaigning, that would be a lot more effective. And
Bernie's thing was in his entire the problem is, well, I don't know if that's the problem, but Bernie's entire political history has been about not negative campaigning.
But that's bullshit. I mean, I hear you, Sam, and I've heard that. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm disagreeing with the idea that he does a negative campaign. I mean, he had no problem drawing distinctions between himself and Hillary Clinton on stage and otherwise. Right. So it's a convenient excuse used when he doesn't want to confront things that he's uncomfortable with. And I love this man. I love this movement. I love this organization. I pretty much love everybody on the campaign with all of my heart. Last campaign too, and this campaign. But the political sophistication of this campaign was crap compared to 2016, when everyone was just like flailing and didn't know what to do. But you had people who had run presidential campaigns before in 2016. And I'm not saying that the people on this campaign weren't good at what they did. There just wasn't enough. There wasn't some central guiding force. There wasn't, there's no reason why some of these
may not have also had the relationships with Sanders to make him do things that he didn't want to do.
Right. And it's true. That's fair. But at the end of the day, and I'm that's a really great out for a lot of people who might be in his inner circle. But the reality is, when you're a campaign manager, or a general consultant, or whoever's leading your campaign, it is your job. Yep. It is your job to make sure that the message gets to the candidate and to, make sure that all the rough edges are softened a little bit. That is your job. It's also your job to set up a political operation to make up for any discrepancies or problems that the candidate himself has, so that you don't lose the WFP, as much as I just have my own personal opinion about them. The WFP, which is ridiculous that they didn't get their support. So you don't lose Raul Grijalva's support. So you're growing the tent, not it's ridiculous that he's the front runner, raised more money than anybody else, has the largest on the ground operation probably in presidential, primary history. And yet he lost support. There's no excuse for that in 2020. And I'm sorry to already go into the analysis, but I really think that this was a combination of communications, as Michael says, communication strategy and political strategy. But I don't really think that the blame lands in Bernie Sanders' lap. I think it has